Okay. I think this is again.
This
doesn't have to be a long answer. The question I'm going to ask you now, and don't jump ahead. I'm going to ask you about what you told him to do when he stuttered.
Okay.
But don't jump ahead. Just what I mean. We'll understand in the story what happened. Okay.
We have speed and we're rolling.
So Emmett stuttered, and what did you tell Emmett to do when he stuttered?
When I found out that Emmett could memorize something and give it back to me perfectly, I turned to him one day and I said, "Bo, when you start to stutter," I said, "just whistle and go ahead and say what you're going to say." And that seemingly worked like a charm. I mean, he could whistle. He would, I guess he would regain his composure, and he could go ahead and say what he wanted to say at that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to ask you to do one more time. But if you could for me, Mrs. Mobley, when you say whistle, whistle. Let me hear. Let me hear.
Lord, I never could whistle.
You can't whistle.
I'll try.
You can't whistle. All right. Even trying will be good. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what did you tell Emmett to do when he stuttered?
I told him, when you find yourself getting hung up on a word, just whistle and go ahead and say what you want to say. And that really kind of tickled him, but he tried to do it, and it really worked like a charm.
And you got after Emmett went down south, he wrote you back. I mean, you got letters, and what kind of time was he having down there? He wrote you, and tell me what he wrote.
He was having a ball. He was enjoying himself. And he was concerned about everyone back home, tell them that he was having a good time and tell them hello for him. And I thought he had asked me to send him his bike.
Let me stop you 1 second. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mobley, because I let me ask you again, because I need for you to say, I got letters from him, so that we can use the letters, just so that we have an idea of how you knew this.
Okay.
That Bo wrote me letters and said he was having a good time. Okay. We rolling?
Yes.
Okay. So again, my apologies for interrupting you, but I'm sure I'll do it again before we're through. So you found out how Bo was doing, how that he was having a good time down south. Mm-hmm. How did you find out?
Well, when Emmett was calling me, just whenever he felt like it, he would pick up the phone, and I discouraged that because that was a long distance call. And I reminded him that he could write. And while he was at Papa Moses' house, he wrote me 2 letters. And in these letters, he would tell me what a wonderful time he was having, and the things that they had done and the things they were looking forward to doing. And it seems like he wrote me one of these letters on a Friday, and Saturday he was supposed to be going to Uncle Crosby's house. And somehow that got switched over to Sunday. They were going to leave Sunday after church instead. And of course, before day Sunday morning, that's when the invasion took place. Mm-hmm. But had they gone Saturday, as they had purposed to do, he would have been able to avoid this confrontation.
I also saw a letter that you had from Mr. Wright, Moses Wright. He wrote you a letter too. Do you remember that? He's saying what a great boy Emmett is. And
I think that was Aunt Lizzie. That was Aunt Lizzie that wrote that letter.
Oh, okay. Let's cut for a second.
Sure.
Okay. We're not ready yet. Everybody ready? I'm ready.
Speak.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mobley. Tell me again how Emmett got the ring.
A day before he left for Mississippi, I gave him his father's ring. And when I gave it to him, he really expressed a lot of excitement over getting Lewis's ring. And he put it on his finger, and it fitted, because Emmett was kind of stocky. But it was a little bit loose on his finger, but not enough to hurt. And he was you would see him ever so often looking down at his hand. And when he got ready to leave, when he departed from me at the police station, at the train station, he said he was going to keep the ring and show it to his friends. Yes.
Okay, let's cut.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna take a.
Just a second, Seiko. It's down there. I'm trying to figure out how I can. Is that
Get it all in.
Yeah.
If you have to, that's fine.
Okay, because I can.
No.
Hold on a second.
I would.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Rolling and mics at speed.
I have lost where I'm supposed to start on this
okay.
letter.
Keep rolling. So you read the date, and then it's I was glad that you all let me.
Oh, it was way down
I
here.
was glad, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then
Okay.
I'll keep it up.
Okay. Okay. Now, what is that you're holding there?
I'm holding a letter from my Aunt Lizzie. It's dated August 25th, 1955, from Greenwood, Mississippi. It says here, I was glad that you all let Bobo come. He is certainly a nice kid. He is just as obedient as you would want to see.
Comment? What do you think about
Well, I know that he was helping her. He was not only working in the field, but he saw the load that my aunt was carrying, and he did what he could to lift that load for her. For instance, he would not go to the field in the morning with the rest of the boys and Papa Mose. He would stay and get the breakfast dishes washed up, go with her to the garden and pick the lunch meal, and come back to the house and help her get that ready. And then when the boys
This young man was being raised right.
came in for lunch, he would go back with them in the afternoon, because they would always rest a little bit after they ate. And that's when Bo would have a chance to help her get the dishes washed up, and whatever was left from the afternoon meal, they added to that for the evening meal.
Okay, let's cut. Sure. Okay. We're rolling. So let me ask you just to start again. I'm sorry. We weren't ready.
Okay.
We weren't ready. But don't. You should probably just say that it's a letter that you received. Don't mention the other letter, because we may not have you read both.
Okay.
So if we only have
All
you
right.
read one, we just want you to say this is a letter that.
All right. This is the last letter that I received.
Okay, hold
from,
on one second.
Okay,
are we
what I'm
ready?
going to do is and move up, okay? In other words, instead of having that wide shot, why don't you just let me start with the letter and then
I see.
okay?
Okay, let's go.
This is the last letter that I received from Emmett. And he said, Dear Mom, how is everybody? I hope you and Jean are fine. I hope you all had a nice trip. I'm having a oh dear, you're gonna have to help
hold on.
me
Let's
here.
cut from there.
Sure.
This
Okay, we're rolling.
Speed.
Okay, Mrs. Mobley.
This is the last letter that I received from Emmett. And he said, Dear Mom, how are you? How is everybody? I hope you and Jean are fine. I hope you all had a nice trip. I'm having a great time. We'll be home next week. Please have my motorbike fixed for me. And this was the letter that I received from him. And I had to ask him, please start writing me and stop calling me. Because when he called, he would call collect. And he didn't care how long he talked. So This was one of two letters that I received from him while he was visiting with Aunt Elizabeth and Papa Moses.
Okay, let's cut. Okay, we're going to roll. We're going to try this one again.
I sing, speak.
Okay.
August 25th.
I'm sorry, if you could start again. You said before, you started before with, this is the last letter I received.
Oh, okay.
Okay, great.
Now, this is the last letter that I received from Emmett. It's dated August 25th, 1955. Dear Mom, how is everybody? I hope you and Jean are fine. I hope you all had a nice trip. I am having a fine time. We'll be home next week. Please have my motorbike fixed for me. This is one of two letters that I received from Emmett. We never lost communication because he was calling, and I had to discourage the calling because he was calling collect, and he didn't have any limit on the time he was using. So I reminded him that, you can write me a letter. And this was the second letter and the last letter that I received from him, which was probably on Saturday morning. And he was taken out of the house before day Sunday morning. And I didn't hear about it until 9:30 Sunday morning.
Great. Okay. Let's cut for 1 second.
I sing, speak.
One of the things I think that's important is that as we go, you let us know how you felt and how these things felt for you. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. But how did you first hear that Emmett was missing?
I received a telephone call at 9:30 Sunday morning. It was from Moses Wright's oldest daughter, Willie Mae Jones, the mother of Curtis Jones. And evidently she had received a call from Curtis telling her what had happened. She called me, but she was so hysterical until I couldn't understand what she was saying. And I told her to hang up. And I called my mother, who lived close by, and asked her to go over and see what the world was wrong with Willie Mae. And my mother called me back to let me know that Bo had been kidnapped.
Okay, great.
At the moment what she'd be going through, to hear that her son has been kidnapped. Can you just really imagine, the space that she would be
in? How did you feel when you heard that?
Oh my goodness. I don't really know how I felt. I wasn't really frightened, but I was very apprehensive. I kind of thought these men, whoever they were, would take him and give him a real good licking and bring him back to Papa Mo's. It never occurred to me that they would kill him. But I jumped out of bed and I made up my bed. Then I called Gene. He lived about 8 blocks away. And I said, Gene, I want you to take me to my mother's house. And he had to either get public transportation, a cab, or walk from where he lived to where I lived. But it seemed that he got to me so quickly. But by the time he got there, I had notified Uncle Mac and Aunt Magnolia downstairs. I had called the news media, every newspaper I could think of, and I didn't call any TV stations, but they picked up the story. All I knew to do was call the newspapers. And the Daily News wanted to talk to me at length, And I told them to meet me at my mother's house, which was on the west side, gave them the address. When Jean got there, I was ready to go. And Jean was stopping at every stop sign and stopping at every red light. And I didn't have time for that. I told him to move over, pull over. And Jean did what I asked him to do, and I took the wheel. And he said, "Oh, you're going to get a ticket. The police is going to stop you." I said, "Well, I hope they do. Then they can put the siren on and get me to Mama's house faster." Because there was no stopping. I had to get to Mama. And when I got there, surely enough, the Chicago Daily News was there. They were waiting on the steps for me to arrive.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I know we talked about before was how hard it was for you to get information out of Mississippi.
Oh,
for you to talk about it, and you had this great quote about comparing it to the Iron Curtain. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Talk about how hard it was for you to find out any information. Was it hard finding out information out of Mississippi?
I didn't find out any information. I mean, every place I called, it was a block there. They didn't know anything. The people that we knew personally, they had to go to church. They couldn't help us with the situation. And I mean, everybody was preoccupied. I couldn't get the governor right away. I finally got him, but I couldn't get the sheriff. It was almost mission impossible. It was as if Mississippi had been sealed off with an iron curtain. I mean, there was no information coming out of there whatsoever.
Do you think that the people you knew, the black people there, were scared already? Do you think that they just didn't want to be involved, or they just were preoccupied? Do you think they were scared?
I didn't even call any black people for help. I was calling on white people that we knew. And Mr. McFall, he was quite he was of renown in the neighborhood. And Mr. McFall told me, he said, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to look at that now. I'm on my way to church." And so I guess he went on to church. And everybody we called had something they had to do, and they could not change their plans.
How did you first hear that they had found Emmett's body? And how did you feel?
I found out from not United Press. What is the other one? One of the news agencies.
Associated Press?
Yes. One of the news agencies called, and they wanted to speak to somebody in the house except me. And I knew immediately what they had to. It was as if I had something telling me what was going to happen next. And I told him, I said, "Sir, there's no one in this house you can talk to except me. And I want you to just give me the news slowly so I can write it down. I don't want to make any mistakes." Well, he would not talk to me. Associated Press, that's who it was. And he wanted to know, did I have any friends? And I gave him the name of my friend in Argo, Illinois, Ollie Williams. And he called her and gave her the story. She, in turn, called me back. Well, I was the one who was answering the phone. I was manning all the telephones. And she wanted to speak to my mother. And I said, "Ollie, the message you have, you cannot give it to my mother. You've got to give it to me." I said, "Mama can't take it." And I said, "Because I want details, and nobody is going to take the details as I will." And she finally was persuaded to give me the message. And she described how his body had been found, how Moses Wright had identified him by the ring on his finger. And she told me about the gin fan that was around his neck, wired with barbed wire around his neck and the other end to that huge gin fan. And he was thrown into the Tallahatchie River. But by some accident, he had become tangled with some undergrowth, and the body couldn't continue to float down the river, and the foot just went up. One of his feet went up above the surface of the water. And there was a young white man, John Hodges, who was fishing with his dad. And he spotted that foot, and he told...
How would you feel if you out fishing one day and you discover a body?
his daddy that there's somebody in the river. Well, the search for Emmett Till had become very intense. And when the sheriff came down, he immediately sent for Moses Wright. And Moses Wright came, and he said that he couldn't tell it was Bo by looking at him. But when he saw the ring on his finger, he said, yes, that's him. That's his ring. And that is the way he identified Emmett.
When your friend Ollie was her name?
Ollie Williams, yes.
When your friend Ollie told you, how'd you feel?
Oh my God, those words were like arrows sticking all over my body. And I had had this visitation by this little white dove who had told me, I will lead you, I will guide you, I will take care of you. All you have to do is obey. And as Ollie was talking to me, I was trying to write, and I would stop her ever so often because my eyes were so full of tears until I couldn't see. And I needed to clear my vision, and then I would go back to writing. And she was so reluctant to give me that information. She wanted to talk to my mother because my mother was she was the force in the family. But I had looked at my mother and I realized that my mother, this is one thing I was going to have to do. Mother could not do this one for me. And when I began to make the announcement that Emmett had been found, and how he was found, the whole house began to scream and to cry. My mother fell prostrate on the floor. And the people that were able to, they were around her. They had just sealed her in. And I stood up and went towards her. And as I approached her on the floor, I felt a surge of something like electricity coming from her to me. And I stepped back because it seemed that if I stayed there, I would zap all the life out of her body. So I moved back and I began to tell the people, give her air, get from around her, get her head up. I was telling them how to take care of Mother. And that's when I realized that this was a load that I was going to have to carry. I wouldn't get any help carrying this load.
You can let's go for a minute.
Mic in, please. Okay, we're ready, Sandy.
Okay. So, Emmett is passed away, and they actually tried to bury his body in Mississippi. Tell me that story. What happened?
Yes, when the sheriff summoned Moses Wright to the riverside, and when Papa Mose identified Bo by the ring on his finger, Sheriff Strider gave the body to, told Moses Wright to take the body, and it had to be buried before the sun went down that night. And Moses Wright was very obedient. He took the body to the church cemetery. They had dug the grave, and they were preparing to put Emmett in the grave when Curtis spoke up and said, "Granddaddy, are you going to bury Bo without talking to Mamie?" And that stopped them. They ceased operations. And he said, "I need to call Mamie." And his grandfather told him, "If you can get a call through, go ahead and call her." And they waited to see what Curtis would be able to do. But he went to home after home after home, mostly white homes in the area, and no one would allow him to use the telephone. In the meantime, when we got the word and I was able to get the house quieted down, I told them, "It's something we have to do, and I don't know what it is, and you're going to have to help me think." And I was telling them how futile it was to be crying. I said, "We don't have enough tears to cry for Emmett Till. The world will cry for Emmett Till." And my aunt spoke up and she said, "Call the undertaker. Call A.A. Rayner." Well, we did that, and A.A. Rayner is the one that reached the right people in Mississippi and laid claim to the body. But he was very skeptical. He called back and he wanted to know. He said it's going to cost $3,300 to get the body out of Mississippi. And he wanted to know, could we pay it? And I told him, "Mr. Rayner, regardless to the cost, I want the body." I said, "If I live, I'll pay you. If I don't live, somebody else will pay you. You will get paid." And I was able to live up to that promise. When we buried Emmett, enough money had come through my hands that I was able to pay him in full, and I had about $250 left, which I put in a savings account.
Let me just go back a little bit, because I wanted to just kind of finish the story as it was going on there in Mississippi, so that Emmett's body, Emmett would have been buried in Mississippi. I mean, they were trying to bury his body in Mississippi.
Yes, and they wanted to get it in the ground as quickly as possible. They didn't want nightfall.
Comments. Why do you think they was in such a big hurry to bury the body? Was it law, or was it covering up evidence?
To catch that body unburied.
And so really, it was Curtis, one of your relatives, who spoke up they were actually had dug the grave and were about to put him in, and somebody spoke up.
Yes. That was Moses Wright's grandson, Curtis Jones. The one who said, Bobo said, "Bye, baby," which is, we have found out that was untrue.
Why do you think they wanted to get the body in the ground so quickly?
Oh, that's obvious. The way that body had been mutilated, they didn't want anybody to see what those devils had done. That was something to be hidden. It was not to be advertised. It was not to be photographed. It was not to be even heard of anymore. Just bury this body and let's get on with our lives.
I think we should stop for a minute and think about this. It was something I read that you said that they were digging a shallow grave, that they were going to dig. So do you think that they were going to actually leave the body in that grave, or do you think they were going to dig it up and get rid of Emmett's body?
I just really don't know. I have no answers for that at all. But I do know that they wanted that body in the ground as quickly as possible. They didn't want any fanfare about it at all.
Okay, great.
And they had no intention of letting the body out of Mississippi.
What do you mean?
They were not, shipping that body to Chicago was not something they intended to do. And it took the intervention of a white undertaker that A.A. Rayner communicated with. And he, in turn, went to the black undertaker, who was a subsidiary of his, they had a white and a black branch. And it was through the white owner that we got the body on the train. I was told that the train wouldn't take the body because of the odor. And, I was told a lot of impossible things. But I didn't waver. I said, I want the body. I want the body. And when the body arrived at 12th Street Station, I went down to receive the body. And to my surprise, there were hundreds of people there. And when I looked up and saw this huge box, it was almost as if the box crushed me to the ground. And one of the things that was foremost on my mind, I wanted to see. I had to see what was in the box. And it was then that I was told about the affidavits that had been signed, the Mississippi seal that was on the big box, the box inside that one, and the third box that housed the casket. All of these had seals and padlocks on them. And it was not to be opened. And Mr. Rayner tried to explain to me that he would be in trouble with the Mississippi authorities if he opened the box. And I didn't care anything about the Mississippi authorities. I wanted to get in the box. And when he just told me he couldn't do it, I reflected a moment and I asked him, Mr. Rayner, do you have a hammer? And that kind of startled him. And he wanted to know, what are you going to do with the hammer? I said, I haven't signed anything and I haven't made any promises. And if you can't open that box, I can, because I'm only expecting one box with a casket inside. But there was a box within the big box, and then another box was inside the second box, and then the casket was inside the third box. And when Mr. Rayner agreed to go into the box, that's when we found all of these other padlocks, 4 padlocks in all, and everyone with the Mississippi seal on it.
Okay, let's cut for a sec. Okay.
On tape 8.
Okay, Ms. Mobley, how did tell me again about the casket arriving with all these seals on it?
Yes, we went to the train station, the 12th Street Station, Illinois Central, and we were waiting for the box, for the body to be brought into the area where we were. And all of a sudden I looked up and there was this huge box. It looked almost as if it were the size of a freight car. And a really ugly box, but so big. And I wondered, why such a huge box? And I later found out that it was one of 3 boxes, because there was a box inside the huge box, and the huge one had a seal and a padlock on it. The box inside it had a seal and a padlock. The third box had a seal and a padlock, and inside the third box was the casket with a seal and a padlock. And I was told that the only way the body was released to come to Chicago was that affidavits were signed and promises were made that the box would not be opened. And of course I objected to that immediately. I mean, when I went up when I saw the casket, it seems as if during that time, between then and the time I actually looked over in the casket to see what Bo looked like, I had a sensation that every bone had turned to steel. And I looked, I mean, the sensation was so intense until I looked at myself to see, could I see the physical changes that were taking place in my body. And my father and Jean were on either side of me to hold me up. And I told them, turn me loose. I said, I'm not going to faint now. I've got a job to do. I've got to try to figure out what this is. And they had, when I looked inside the casket, all I saw was a huge something in a body bag with a lot of white pellets all over the body, all in the bag. And I told Mr. Rayner, I said, I can't see what's in the box. I mean, you're going to have to wash it off so I can see it. Well, they were very patient with me. They took the body to the back of the casket of the funeral parlor where they dress the bodies, where they present them, get them ready for presentation. And they took him out of the body bag and they washed him off, and they called me back and let me look at him there. And when I glanced at his face, I had to turn away. I just couldn't look him in the face. And I remember I started at his feet and I checked certain checkpoints all the way up until I got to his neck. But one thing I observed was that he had not been castrated. He was all there. But that rumor has persisted that he was castrated and his intimate parts stuffed in his mouth. Well, that was not true. Thank God that was not true.
Okay, let's cut for 1 second. Okay.
Roberts.
Okay, and that's you. You're now
Yes, I'm in the chair.
In a wheelchair. So you see this big. You're still at the train station. Let's tell that story, and then we'll tell the other story of the funeral home. So you're at the train station. You see this huge, box come off the train, and there's a bunch of pictures of you, and you seem to be breaking down. How did you feel?
I felt that box was on top of me, crushing me to the ground. I felt the weight of that box. And I was not prepared to see anything so huge. And I had no idea how I would feel when I observed what he was returned to me in. I was totally unprepared for that.
And when you went to the funeral home, my understanding is you went to the funeral home, with the box, and they opened the box. And didn't Rayner ask you not to look?
Yes, they did want me to look. But I had to look because I had to be sure that I was going to bury Emmett. I mean, even, with $3,300 staring me in the face, I didn't want to bury nothing or somebody else. I wanted to make sure that I was burying Emmett. And that was the whole idea behind seeing what was in the box. Because I realized they could have filled it with bricks. They could have put mud in it. It could have been somebody else's body. I had to know for sure.
And so tell me the story again in the funeral home. So I thought Rayner said, please don't look. Did he say something like that? And then you went ahead and looked. And what did he ask you not to look?
Yes, even my father didn't want me to look. Nobody wanted me to look at Emmett. But I had to look at Emmett. I mean, how he looked was not the issue. I had to make sure I had Emmett. And that was the only way I could be sure.
describe to me. Can you want some water? Maybe you
I
want.
think my water. Oh,
Mike's in.
Ready?
So you're at Rayner's funeral home, and they ask you not to look, but you insisted on looking.
mm-hmm.
Describe what you saw when you opened the casket. Describe what you saw when you looked.
Well, as I said, I started at his feet. And there were little things that I could identify on my way up to his head. Because after all, I'd been bathing him for a long time. I had to stop at age 5. He would let me bathe him after age 5. So when I paused at his midsection, I got a little jolt because I knew he would not want me looking at him. But I saw enough that I knew he was intact. In fact, there were very few blemishes on his body until you got to his neck. And all of the scarring, all of the beating was about his head. And I saw that his tongue was choked out, and it was way down below his chin. And it was such a big tongue. I didn't know human beings had tongues so big. And as I came on up, I noticed that there was the right eye was lying on midway his cheek, and I noticed that his nose had been broken, like somebody took a meat chopper and chopped his nose in several places. I looked for this eye, and it was gone, just as if somebody had picked it out with a net picker. And I went back to examine his ears, because his ears were not attached to his face, and the end of it curled up a little bit. And I couldn't find the ear. I only found a portion of an ear. And I wanted to know, where is that? As I kept looking, I saw a hole, which I presumed was a bullet hole. And I could look through that hole and see daylight on the other side. And I wondered, was it necessary to shoot it? It seemed like that was the final insult, the shot through the head. But I also noticed that the forepart of his face and the back of his head were separated. They had come down over his head with a not an axe, but a hatchet. That's what Willie Reed, I think Willie Reed said that. And the front of the face and the back of the head were in separate pieces. And Mr. Rayner asked me, he said, "Do you want me to touch the body up?" I said, "No, let the people see what I've seen." I said, America needs to know what is going on in the South. And I turned to Jean. I said, "Jean, what are your thoughts?" He said, "Well, that's Bo, all right." He said, "Because I'll never forget his head." He said, "And I gave him that haircut." Jean was his barber. So not only did I have my verification, I had Jean's as well.
Okay. Are we okay?
No, I'm just saying you're right here, so you could
I'm
hit the
sorry.
tripod. But get the mic closer.
You okay? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Let's. Well, I wanted you to just go back a little bit, and because I know one thing we talked before, you talked a little bit more about how you kind of looked from his. I just wanted you to talk about how you looked from his feet and his knees. You recognize,
Mm-hmm.
kind of up until you get to his up to his neck. I think
right.
just a little bit more on that, but it doesn't have to be long.
All right.
So I come wider and
Yeah,
then move
sure.
in if I need to. Oh, sure. Reestablish the frame. Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Rolling.
So when you looked, so you insisted on looking. Did you start? At the face. Where did you start?
I started at Emmett's feet, I had glanced his face and I had to turn away. And when I turned away, I decided I would start at his feet and I would examine him all the way up until I got to the face. And one thing, I noticed his ankles. He had, his ankles were very, very sharp. And I noticed the sharpness of those ankles.
Okay, let's cut.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We're gonna start over. I'm sorry, man. So, again, did you start at the face?
No. When I glanced Emmett's face, I had to turn away. I could not focus on his face. And I decided then that I would start at his feet and work my way up, maybe gathering strength as I went. And when I got to his ankles, I noticed those little sharp bones in his ankle. Okay, that was Emmett's ankle. And I came on up his leg until I got to his knee. And his knees were like my knees. He didn't have knobby knees. A lot of people have knobby knees, but he had flat knees. And I said, those are his knees. And I came on up to his midsection. And I just paused long enough to note that he was still intact. Nobody had castrated him or anything like that, as the rumors had it. And I kept on up until I got to his chin. And then I was forced to deal with his face. And that's when I noticed his tongue hanging below his chin. And I noticed that the size of the tongue, it was unbelievable. It was bigger than the tongues that my mother used to cook, the beef tongues that my mother used to cook. And I was amazed that a human being's tongue would be so big, but I don't know if that was due to the body being waterlogged or what it was. But I moved on up from the chin until I saw the eye that was lying dangling from the eye socket and about halfway the right cheek. And I looked on the other side and that eye was completely out, as if it had been picked out. I noticed the bridge of his nose, which had been, it looked as if it had been chopped. And from there I went to look at his ear, the right ear, because I was on the right side. And I noticed that the part of the ear that I was looking for was missing. And I wondered, where is his ear? And I couldn't identify the ear because it was non-existent. But I saw this bullet hole around the temple area. And I could see daylight through the bullet hole. And I wondered why. Was it really necessary to shoot him? Because by then he should have been dead. That body wouldn't, he wouldn't be able to take all of that punishment and yet be alive. But I also noticed that the front of his face and the back of his head had been chopped with something like a hatchet. And the face and the back of the head were separated. Now there's a picture that was taken by Jet magazine, and on the left side you can see all the thread they used to sew the back of the head and the face back together to make it one unit. And Mr. Rayner asked me, he said, do you want me to touch the body up? I said, no, Mr. Rayner, let the people see what I've seen. I was just willing to bear it all. I think everybody needed to know what had happened to Emmett Till. And but when I came back that evening, I was amazed at how much better he looked than when I had seen him. The eye was gone, the tongue was back in his mouth was all pooped out it was protruding. I saw the stitches on the side where they had sewn him back together. And I turned to Mr. Rayner. I said, Mr. Rayner, you have done a beautiful job. And he looked at me, but from what I had seen previously, he had done a beautiful job.
So
Which changed tapes?
You were saying that you asked them not to work on Emmett, but that when you came back, they had done a little bit of work.
They had done a great deal of work.
So my question is, so what you're telling me is then that the pictures that we see, right?
Yes.
As horrible as they are,
Yes.
it was worse when you first saw it.
Those pictures are fantastic when it comes to what I originally saw. The pictures were 10 times better than Emmett looked when I looked at his body unretouched.
It's because Rayner and them actually did a little bit of work. They did
a whole lot of work. They closed his mouth, they removed that eye, they got his tongue back in his mouth, they sewed his head and skull back together. I mean, they did an awful lot of work.
Why? I mean, one of the. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your decision to leave the casket open. I mean, I think that is one of the most important decisions that one of the most important decisions in the whole civil rights movement that you and to a lot of people.
Yes.
That you decided to leave the casket open. Why?
Well, the crowd was so huge at the funeral parlor until I knew that the people could not pass by the funeral and by the body. It would take hours for that crowd to dissipate, and people were still coming. So it was necessary for me to come forth and help control the crowd. We had quite a few white police officers, and when they would push the crowd back, there would be an angry explosion. There would be swearing and everything. The white policemen were just not welcome. The black people were ready to tear them to shreds. So they put me in a window, and I stood in the window and I talked to the crowd, and I told them that they would be able to come in and view Emmett. But please let us go ahead with what we had to do, and when we left, the body would still be available. And when I would talk to them, they would quiet down and they would ease up. But early Saturday morning, this was Friday evening, early Saturday morning, I received a call from Rayner, and he said, would you please tell us where we can relocate the body, because they're going to tear my establishment off of its foundation. And I told him to take the body to 4021 South State Street. That was the mother church of the Churches of God in Christ in Illinois. And Bishop Isaiah Roberts was the pastor. And I don't know, I didn't call him and ask him, could I do this? I just did it. And oddly enough, he accepted the assignment. He put Emmett in the basement, and the people would come in one door, they would pass by the casket, then they had two ways they could go out. They could go out a side door, or they could go out the way they came in. So the people walked day and night. I got 2 or 3 reports from the procession that was going on there. And I was told that somebody had put out 2 number 3 wash tubs. Those are the tubs we used to bathe in. And they were being filled with money, and ever so often they would disappear. Well, they would disappear and they would put out 2 more tubs. And it seems that people were just dropping money like mad. And out of that money, I got enough to take care of the funeral. And I had about $250 left over, which I put in a savings account.
Okay. You should probably get close.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about. I want to go back to. I guess it was in the funeral home when the body first arrives that you made the decision to leave the casket open. Mm-hmm. You said I want the world to see.
That's right.
Why did you make the decision to leave the casket open?
Well, I knew that I could not tell people what I had seen. Number one, they wouldn't believe me. But if I had 200 or 300 witnesses, then all of us could testify to what they had done to Emmett. And I thought the world needed to know what was going on in Mississippi. And that was the only way they would know, would be for me to pull the cover off and let the world see what was going on.
Okay, let's cut.
Okay.
We had our...
Hold on one second.
Microphone in.
Okay. Let me ask you the question. The funeral seems like it was pretty emotional.
Very emotional. Number one, the church was crowded to the extent that we didn't know if the balconies were going to collapse and fall down on the rest of the people or what. But again, I had to speak over the loudspeaker and tell the people if they would just be patient and let us have our funeral, we would leave and the church would be open for them to come and go as long as they wanted to. Because I thought that pretty soon the crowd would die down. It looked like all of Chicago was there. But this procession continued from Friday evening until Tuesday afternoon. We had Labor Day coming in there on a Monday. And that meant that all day Saturday, all day Sunday, all day Monday until about noon Tuesday, people were marching. And they said that about 1 in every 5 had to be assisted out of the building. They would just go into a faint. Pregnant women were coming and their families were trying to dissuade them from looking at what was in the casket. But they came anyway. And they had to tie off the State Street traffic because the crowd spilled from the sidewalk, which was unusually wide, all the way out into the roadway itself. And they rerouted the traffic. And Tuesday, when I got back to take Emmett and go to Burr Oak with him, they had to force an opening for me to get through. And we went in, we led the body out, and we proceeded to Burr Oak Cemetery. And I am told that that is the largest procession in the history of Chicago. And the only one might have exceeded it, and that was when Mayor Washington died.
Okay, cut. Right, looking at the body. And people, brought their kids to see the body, to view the viewing. Why did people bring kids?
Oh, the people that I have talked to wanted their children to remember what had happened to Emmett Till. And they wanted them to face up to reality that the black man in America is not free. And this is all that I can say. They wanted their children to know the dangers of living in America because so many people sent their children south for the summer. When school was out, the kids would go south. And they wanted them to know that it is very hazardous in the south, so you have to watch your step.
Okay, let's cut. Then that I've read in interviews with you. Okay, roll. I mean, because one of the ways that the world thinks of you is as an activist and somebody who's very involved. You know, and we're talking about before 1955, let's say 1954. Were you an activist? Were you involved in, you know, black causes and stuff? Were you an activist then?
Not really. I contributed to the NAACP, and I always gave in the community chest rally that was taken up to divide among the various charities. But my job was my job. I had to raise Emmett, and I had to go to my job. And I never took a day off from work. And, I mean, I was just in my own personal little groove. And I thought when I took care of Emmett and took care of the job that I had, that was just all I could do.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, cut. that I saw is there's a clip of you speaking to a group. Maybe it's like a week or 10 days after Emmett's murder. And you know you're involved, and you when you look in your eyes, you look like you're almost still in shock, but there you are out there, speaking. Why did you feel it was necessary to? I mean, what was the change in you that a week afterwards you're now out there speaking?
Well, number one, if I had had to hold all of this inside of me, I would have exploded. I needed to talk about it. I needed to wake people up. It wasn't a job that I could do alone. It was going to take a lot of us working together to change the scenario. And there were so many people who were after me to come and speak. And I was afraid of falling into the hands of the wrong people. I didn't want to get involved with any communist or any disreputable organizations. So I went to New York and I asked the head of, Roy Wilkins, the head of the NAACP, to help me to set up my places of speaking for me, because I figured they would know who was legit and who was not. And in the meantime, he told me that my speaking would generate funds for them to send an attorney to Mississippi with me to fight my case. So I was more than willing to talk and gather the money to help this. What I didn't know was that the NAACP was broke following Brown versus the Board of Education. I read later in Jet magazine that in 3 months I had raised $250,000 for them. And that was, oh my God, that was money, money, money. Now it doesn't seem very significant. But in 1955, if you had $10,000 in your bank account, you were secure for life. You didn't have to worry about, you had no financial worries. So $250,000, that was really, they were on their feet again. So that's why I was able and willing to go and speak where they had me to speak.
Okay, cut. Trial.
All right.
Okay.
Oops. Okay. Good.
Roll.
In the comments, can you imagine Mamie standing above a crowd talking to a bunch of people. Can you imagine what she have said?
We're ready? Try to look at me as much as you can. 'Cause sometimes you're tending to... What everybody always does, they want to look at everybody else in the room, because that's the normal thing.
That's true.
You try to make eye contact with everybody. What did you think when you heard that they would try 2 white men for the murder, in Mississippi? Do you remember what you thought?
Oh, I was elated. At last, Mississippi is going to rise up and do what she is supposed to do. The fact that they arrested the men, that was a triumph. And I expected to go to Mississippi, attend the trial, and walk out victorious. But it didn't happen that way.
Okay, again, this is going to be a hard one, but try not to let us know what the outcome of the story is. Because I think that there's so many people now, I found in doing this film, who don't know.
They don't know.
They don't know what happened, so don't let us know. We're going to kind of tell this as a story. So let me just ask you that again. Let's do something else first.
Okay.
If you can go super close if you need
Sure.
to. So tell just again, try not to jump ahead. So how did you feel when you heard that they had caught the men who murdered your son?
I was elated. I thought that we have won a victory already. Just the fact that 2 white men had been arrested for a crime against a black man. So that in itself was a giant step forward.
We have someone.
Be honest with this. Do you think Mississippi is embarrassed from their past? The things that went on, the events that took place.
Cut.
We have the mic in, and we have speed.
In seeing the footage that we just saw of the trial and the people hanging out outside and drinking cokes and everything, it looked like a circus or a carnival. What was the atmosphere like at the trial?
That it was a circus atmosphere. Number one, the temperature was unbearably hot. In the courtroom, they recorded 118 degrees. And of course, there was no air conditioning. They had the ceiling fans that were only stirring the air up, making it hotter when it reached your body. Outside, there was the sun beaming down, and the people, the curiosity seekers. It was really like they were going to a big celebration of some kind. They wanted to know what was going to happen with this black woman down here testifying and all of that stuff, because I was not supposed to be in Mississippi. They had threatened me and had threatened Mayor Daley if he allowed me to come. But I had made the decision that I had no choice in the matter. I had to be in Mississippi. I had business there. And it was with this in mind that I went. And when my father said he would go with me, oh my God, I felt like I had the whole world on my side. And then there was Rayfield Moody, my stepfather's nephew. He said, I asked him, would he go? He said, what do you mean, will I go? He said, if you go, I go. And here I am with these 2 daring men, one on each side. I just felt like I could conquer the world. And so this was our attitude, but when we got there, we experienced something altogether different. They were belligerent. They were angry that I was coming in there to upset their way of life. And they didn't spare any pains to let me know how unwelcome I was.
We're getting those lights in her eyes.
Yeah, I can try and let me cut first.
See?
Rolling.
You're a nice woman.
Okay. Where do I be typing?
You're a nice woman. You could have been mean there, like the rest of these people.
Yes, the rest of
me.
us.
Now you well, you married me.
Son.
Okay, ready? Are we rolling?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, how are you treated in the courtroom? How are you treated?
Like dirt. I felt, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was nothing. I was looked at and over. Other people were being served in the courtroom, and I was dying of thirst. And when we would try to get service, they would look at us like we were invisible and turn their heads and go in the other direction. There was nothing we could buy in that courtroom. If we needed to take a rest break, we had to leave the courtroom and go about 2 blocks in the hot sun to a black cafe. And that's where we were able to relieve ourselves. The accused were given free access to the judge's chambers. When they needed to go, they went into the judge's chambers, and that's where they did whatever they had to do and came back.
Hold on, I can't see because I don't have my glasses on. And I have some good questions here. If I can only see them. One thing I think that must have been incredible is we saw in the footage, Milam and Bryant with their kids coming in the courtroom, and their kids, and they're being portrayed, in a certain way, and they've killed your son.
Yes.
How did that feel when you see them with their kids on their laps and stuff?
I wasn't amused or thrilled by them having their sons on their knees, because they looked after their children during the proceedings. And the kids were fidgety, as 2- and 3-year-olds would be. And they were demanding a whole lot of attention, which they were getting. And they wanted to eat, they wanted to drink, and so did the fathers. They were eating and drinking, and that only increased our thirst. We were over to the left side of the courtroom in a little, at a little homemade table that evidently had been made out of pine, I guess. It was very splintery. And the first day, you have a tendency to put your arm on the table. And every time I would touch the table, I would get the stick of a splinter, and it would pull at the fabric in my dress. So I had to learn to sit away from the table. And the next day we brought newspapers to pad the tables with. And as we sat near a window, let's say that the table was going north and south, and at the north end of the table there was a window, and the men had gotten together and planned our escape in case something unfavorable broke out in the courtroom, which could well have happened. And they decided that one man would jump out, and then the other man would jump out, and they would catch us women as we jumped out. I was there, and Ruby Hurley was there, and Clotilde, somebody by the name of Clotilde. She was a Defender reporter. There were 3 women, and they were going to look out for us, and the rest of the men would have to take their chances. Everybody else, you get out the best way you can. And
so they actually had an escape plan.
Yes, and we did everything except rehearse it. But Congressman Diggs was there, along with 2 more who were attorneys, and there were other people there. I don't know where they were from. I remember mostly the congressman and his two men.
Okay, let me interrupt because again, well, if you could just say, just start out with, we had an escape plan, just so we get that, because I think
An escape plan. I'm gonna tell you right now, that is the mindset of men. Period. I can see nothing has changed, but can you imagine your child being murdered, and when you show up to court, you're the one that's treated harshly? That is sad.
you started kind of in the middle of the story. So tell me again, you had something planned.
Yes, we had an escape route planned in case something violent would break out in the classroom. And that
I'm sorry,
plan...
you said courtroom. You said classroom.
Oh, in the courtroom.
Okay, let me ask you
case...
again. Let me start over. So you had an escape plan.
Yes, we did. We had decided that two of the reporters would leap from the window that was at one end of the table.
Let me ask you again. I'm sorry, because we had a noise, and I need you to say escape plan. So we had an escape plan.
Yes.
Okay.
I've got it, Tiger.
Okay. Okay. Now, so you had something planned.
Yes, we had an escape plan, which meant that if anything unfavorable broke out in the classroom, there...
You said classroom again.
In the... I'm classroom...
Back in school.
Yes.
Teaching.
Yes, we had an escape plan.
Okay, let me ask you again, because I don't think we're ready. Everybody rolling?
Yes.
Okay, so you had something planned, huh?
Yes, we had an escape plan whereby if anything happened in the courtroom that necessitated our getting out in a hurry, two of the men were to leap from the window to the ground and catch the three women, the three of us who were sitting at the black table. And then the rest of the men would have to get out the best way they could. They would have to take care of themselves. But it was just amazing how tense that courtroom situation was.
Mm-hmm. You were on the second floor, weren't you?
Yes, we were.
So that was kind of a weird plan. First men would have to...
Yes, the men were going to have to land and then they would catch us. But fortunately, all of us were very neat in size then.
Mm-hmm. You said that they tried to portray Brian and Milam as family men.
As family men,
okay, if you could say that for me again. So let me ask you the question. Are we ready?
Right.
How were Milam and Brian portrayed?
Milam and Brian were portrayed as loving family men, devoted to their wives and their children. In fact, each of them had two sons, ranging in age from 4 to 2. And each of them had a child nestled on his knee. And the children were playing with daddy, they were playing with one another, they were hitting, they were just doing things that 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds would do. And the fathers were very patient with them. They were listening to see what did they need and how they could satisfy what the kids wanted.
That must have been, give me a real close up. That must have been extra galling. I mean, because these are the men who are accused of killing your...
And seeing the person that unalived your child be so gentle with their own. I mean, how would that make you feel? Let me know in the comments.
Your son,
Yes.
There they are with their sons
Yes.
being portrayed as family men. So how did that feel?
That didn't feel good. It was it was just such a lie until the truth leaked out anyway. I mean, you knew that these men were not what they were being portrayed to be. And knowing that this was a false opinion that was being reached, I wondered how soon would that veneer crack. I just wondered that.
Mm-hmm.
But the ironic thing is, they took my one son, but both of them lost their two sons. They never saw them grow up.
Yeah. You said that Mose Wright had been afraid. You said that he was obedient. Those were the words that you used when the sheriff told him to bury Emmett Till. To bury Emmett, you said that he was obedient. And
yes.
So, what gave him the courage to testify?
We have asked that question over and over again. Why was he able to stand on the witness stand and point his finger at the two men and name them, call them by their names? This is something that maybe we will never understand, because courage was coming from places where it was not expected to come from. But the truth just came out.
Mm-hmm. Can we go for a minute?
Sure.
So I was saying, talk to me about the courage that it took for Mose Wright and Willie Reed to testify, because that's something people don't understand today.
Well, never before in the history of Mississippi had any black man faced a white man and made an accusation against him. That was courage. That was the peak of being courageous. I don't know why Moses Wright felt that he could do this. I certainly don't know why Willie Reed felt he could testify. But they were just like two mice walking into a lion's den when they testified against Milam and Bryant. And to this day, we are wondering what gave them the courage. We know that it had to be the Almighty God, because without His help, none of us would have been able to do what we did.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What was your testimony? What did you say at the trial? What was the crux, the main thing that you said at the trial?
What they wanted out of me was proof positive that was my child. And they would ask me questions, and they would even skew these questions so that if I said yes or no, there was doubt. I might not can remember a direct example, but they alluded to my collaboration with the NAACP, and they concluded, or they summed up by saying, isn't it true that you and the NAACP got your heads together and you came down here, and with their help you all dug up a body, and you have claimed that body to be your son? Isn't it true that your son is in Detroit, Michigan with his grandfather right now? And his grandfather was there with me. But they just did all kinds of scheming to make me out to be a liar and a troublemaker. And then they talked about Emmett's insurance. I had two policies on him. One was a nickel a week, one was a dime a week. The nickel policy would double and bring me $1,000. The dime policy would double and bring me $2,000. And then they wanted to know, did I have Emmett killed so I could collect double indemnity on his insurance? They did everything they could to drag my character.
Be honest with me. Can you imagine being asked those type of questions? They murdered this woman's child and then tried to blame her for it. That is so sad.
Down to make me look like an uncaring mother, a schemer, and a money grubber.
Where were you when the the verdict came in, and how did you feel?
When the jury retired, I said to my group, I said, it's time for us to go. And Congressman Diggs said, what? I missed the verdict? And I looked at him. I was surprised that he didn't know what the verdict was going to be. And I said, Congressman, this is one verdict you don't want to be present to hear. I said, the verdict is not guilty. And he looked at me and he kind of scoffed at me. I mean, after all, this man is a lawyer and he knows the procedure and he has weighed the evidence, and he knew that they had to come up with a guilty verdict. But because I was so agitated, for my sake, everybody agreed that we would all leave, because I was going to leave whether they left or not. We were in two separate cars. And but to appease me, everybody left. We were out of town about 45 minutes away, between Sumner and Mount Bio, Mississippi, where we were staying. And the verdict came in not guilty. And the town erupted. I mean, the screaming, you could hear guns firing. I mean, it was almost like a 4th of July celebration. Or it was almost as if the White Sox had won the pennant in the city of Chicago. It was just, it was a mess. We were very, very happy that we were 45 minutes away from Sumner, because with that verdict came the additional permission. Well, it was really they gave the okay sign for whites to do in on blacks. And I had seen the black people, as the jury retired, the black people who were standing around the walls began to ease out of the door. And I knew that there was significance to their moving out of the courtroom. And that's when I took my cue that we should leave. But it was open season on blacks. And I think the blacks there knew that the farther they were away from town, the better off they would be. So this, then we heard reports from the jury foreman, and his comment was, it wouldn't have taken us that long, but they told us to make it look good. So we drank soda water and beer and swapped a few jokes, and then we came in with our verdict. It took them 1 hour and 7 minutes to find the culprits not guilty.
With me, how would you feel hearing something like that? That they didn't take your case serious. Your child was unalived by monsters, and those monsters was pointed out in court, and the jury just laughed and joked about it. How would you feel about that?
Beautiful. You said that when we started talking about the trial, right? You said that when the men were arrested, you were very optimistic. You know, that you were optimistic. When did that turn? You know what I'm saying? You started out optimistic. By the end of the trial, you don't even want to hear the verdict because you know what's going to happen. How did that change happen? When did you go from being optimistic to knowing what the deal was?
I think the Monday that we walked into the courtroom and we could not be seated because of our color, I think that is when my optimism took a downward turn. And as the trial proceeded, and as I watched the antics of the men, their wives, children, and mother, and compared that with the treatment we were getting, I knew then that we didn't have a chance.
Cut.
Sure.
I saw them.
Hold on.
I'm sorry. The mic's on it.
Waiting for sound.
Sounds ready.
Okay.
I saw Milam and Bryant. I've seen it on tape, where Milam and Bryant were questioned after the trial and after the verdict had been given. And they were asked how did they feel or something to that matter. And Roy said, "I'm just glad it's over." And when they asked Milam, he repeated what Bryant had said. They were very careful not to give additional information. And they asked the women the same or a similar question, and their responses were very cryptic. And when it got to Juanita Milam, she said, "Me too." That's all she said. But they were not going to let you see what they felt, whether or not they were afraid. They were determined not to let that show.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's cut for 1 second.
Okay. Speed.
I don't think we need that because she says she's in the car,
Yeah.
and people start shooting guns
And screaming, and they were just having a riotous time.
Right. Okay, now this, I'm going to ask you some other questions.
Should I stop?
Yes, stop for a second. There was still hope because it was a kidnapping.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, after the trial, there was still hope that Milam and Bryant would be brought to justice. Talk about that.
After the trial, even though they had been found not guilty, there was still hope had not died because they had to answer to the kidnapping trial, and they had already admitted that they kidnapped Emmett and that they took Emmett from my uncle's house. And so when that trial was convened, we just knew that justice was going to have to be done here. But that trial was thrown out because they were in a different county than where the kidnapping occurred. So that county had no jurisdiction over the case, so they threw it out. And Moses Wright and Willie Reed went back to Mississippi for this trial. And now that took that certainly took a lot of courage. They had testified at the trial. They had escaped with their lives. And now they're going back into the lion's den to testify again. And when it was thrown out, it was up to them to get out of Mississippi the best way they could. They had no assistance getting them out.
Talk about, at this point, you also appealed to the federal government. You went to Washington. You said something about like the president on down should be responsible. Did you have hopes that again we're in a period of time? Did you have hopes that the federal government would now intervene?
Oh yes, I mean Eisenhower was in office, and the whole nation had kind of turned to Eisenhower because they thought he was a fair man, and blacks who had never voted Republican before turned to Eisenhower, helped to vote him in. But when I appealed to the president ended up going, he had a heart attack. He never responded to my telegram. And the next headline I read was they named the hospital he was in, and that was the only response we had from the president, was a heart attack, and everybody was concerned about his well-being, and no one was concerned about his giving a hand to help out with the Emmett Till case.
I don't believe in coincidences. This woman had reached out to Eisenhower and then suddenly he passes? To me, that sounds a little fishy. But you tell me what you think about that in the comments.
So there was what's the word I'm looking for? No relief from the federal government.
No relief whatsoever. I also appealed to J. Edgar Hoover, and he finally responded by saying they had researched the case in its entirety and no federal rules had been violated. And therefore, the federal government there was no way they could enter the case.
At this time, at the time that there's still a chance of the kidnapping charges being brought against Milam and Bryant, was when they brought out the news of Lewis Till's death. So if you could just...
They brought that out during the trial itself, if I remember correctly.
I thought it was. I'm pretty sure it was at the kidnapping. It was at that point when they were trying to indict these men for kidnapping. That's correct, right?
Yeah, in between.
In between.
Murder.
Yeah, yeah. And so they had already been.
The trial was over.
The trial was over, and they
Okay.
they were about to be. There was a chance that they would be indicted for kidnapping, and then this news came out. So, if you can tell me, what the news was about your ex-husband, and how you heard it, and if we can do that, it should not be too long a story. But what happened?
Well, that is what I am yet waiting to find out. No one has ever told me what happened. Senator Eastland came out with the story that Lewis had been hung and for rape and murder. There were people in his battalion who wrote to me and talked to me on the phone and talked to Jet Magazine. They said that Lewis Till was railroaded, and they talked about him as being a giant of a man who was always laughing and kidding and playing around, and they could not envision him as being a murderer or a rapist. But Lewis was a terrific boxer, and he made money with his fist, and he was also a terrific gambler. He lost money with his gambling. That's one of the things that separated us, his not getting home on Friday with money to live on until the next Friday. And Lewis not only was good as a boxer, but he would send me V-mail envelopes with checks in them. I would get 3 and 4 a month at $100 a piece. And can you imagine what $300 or $400 a month meant? When the top wage my stepfather was making was between $24 and $26 a week if he worked overtime.
Well, let me ask you again. Because I think it shows the kind of how low, the top level of the people in Mississippi would go. So if you can tell me the story, you had never, the government had sent you a telegram, and this is what you knew and what you believed. But then how did you hear something different? Did you read it in the paper? Did somebody call you? How did you hear that Eastland had this other news?
I'm sure that I read it in the newspaper. I am sure that it came over television and over radio, because there was complete coverage of the Emmett Till case. And when Senator Eastland appealed to the Army headquarters, they told him the whole story. The story that they told him was one that I had never heard before. All I knew was that Emmett Till was hung on a given date, and the cause of his death was willful misconduct. I was never told what the willful misconduct was. I could not get an answer no matter how I tried and who I appealed to. They would not give me any further information. So my information came when Eastland dug up the dirty work.
And why would Senator Eastland, he's the senator from Mississippi, why would he go to that trouble? What was on his mind, do you think?
Well, he was trying to show that Emmett Till was like his father. That Emmett Till was the one who was guilty for whatever he did to the white woman in the store. That was his way of proving that the murderers had a reason to do what they did.
Mm-hmm. Was your husband's name Emmett too, or no, just his name?
No, his name was Louis Till.
Mm-hmm. If you could just say Louis Till 3 times for me.
Louis Till. Louis Till. Louis Till.
Okay, thanks. Let's cut.
Okay.
You said it.
Rolling.
Speed.
How do you think the whole case, everything that happened, has changed? How do you think that it changed you?
I am certainly not a dependent person the way I was before Emmett was killed. I was completely dependent upon my mother. I looked to her for guidance, to bear my burdens or whatever had to be done. And then all of a sudden I realized that I could no longer depend on Mama. It was up to me. And it has made a stronger person out of me. I have been able to look beyond my needs and see the needs of others. And I think I've been quite a force in working towards those needs and building boys and girls up in their weak spots.
We have to change state.
Speed.
Okay. Ms. Mobley, again, look at me. We got only a few more questions, so let's summon up that energy because it'll feed right into the camera and into the story. I think it's important, that we continue. If everybody has a job to do, while we're here on Earth, everybody has a job to do. What was Emmett's job?
Come on now. Emmett was 14 years old when his life was taken. That is not a good question. A better question would be, if he got to live his life, what do you think he would have grown up to become? Let me know in the comments what you think about that.
According to a visitation I had the Wednesday after I received the message that Emmett's body had been recovered from the river, for the first time since that Sunday, I went to bed. My mother prevailed with me to go and lie down. And when I went into the room, and I had gotten pretty comfortable, but of course, my mind was going like a washing machine. And all of a sudden, a presence filled the room. It was just like a huge cloud, and it filled every corner and every inch of the room. And I recognized that as the presence of God Himself. And I began to talk to Him, and I was speaking in a scolding voice, why? And I heard Him. I reached out my hand, and I felt the contact, and I was pulled to a sitting position. And I began to ask the Lord, why Emmett? I mean, he was a church-going boy. He was a good kid. And it seemed to me that he had been punished for this, just unreasonably punished. And the Lord began to talk to me in a booming voice. They were not words. I didn't understand a single word, but I knew everything that was being said. It was like it was a boom, the roar of thunder, but I could understand what was being said. And the thing that the Lord said to me was, Emmett did not belong to you. You should be grateful to have been able to keep him for the short time he was on the earth. But Emmett was mine. I sent him here to do a job, and Emmett has done that job well. The Lord told me, he said, I've taken one, but I will give you thousands. And I really, I puzzled over that briefly because I had been wanting more children, and I had never conceived again, and I just wondered where the thousands were coming from. But the Lord went on to say that his son Jesus came here that men might have a choice between eternal life or eternal damnation. My son Emmett came here so that men would have the right to a free life and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here on earth. And he said, Emmett has done his job, and now it's up to you to do your job. And I drew back. I was very upset about having a job to do. I thought I had already done a job.
Let me know in the comments, what exactly do you feel that your job is to do here on earth?
And to put another burden on me was just more than I could accept. But he continued to talk to me, and I continued to listen. And I remember when the little dove told me, all you have to do is obey. And I decided that I would be obedient to the voice of the Lord. I knew who I was talking to. And when the conversation closed, I could feel the grip on my hand easing. And as it eased, I went back upon the pillow and I went sound asleep. I didn't wake up until late the next morning, and my mother came in the room and began to call me because she didn't know if I'd had a heart attack and died or what. But she awakened me and persuaded me to get up and have breakfast. And that was the first meal I remember eating since I had gotten to her house that Sunday morning.
Okay, that's good. Okay, question. How did you feel when you heard about the Look article? You know, that these men, Milo and Brian, admitted killing your son, that they also were paid $4,000, so in effect, they made money out of it. You know, how did you feel?
To tell you the truth, I was so far removed from Milo and Brian until I really had no reaction. It was as if my mind was a giant blackboard and someone had taken an eraser and just erased all traces of Milo and Bryant from my mind. I looked at it. I didn't really react to it. And it was just something that should not have happened, but it did. And what was I going to do about it? Nothing at all. I didn't waste any time fretting over that.
Mm-hmm. What's the lesson to be learned for I guess the lesson of for all of us of your son's death? What's the lesson?
I think the Lord had Emmett to take on the looks of racial hatred. We know it's an ugly thing, but we didn't know how ugly it was until Emmett became the embodiment of race hatred. And when we saw that, it was something that we wanted to avoid. We didn't want to go in that direction at all. It was frightful. And I think that just as Jesus became sin and his Father turned away from him, Jesus in his agony called out and said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" And it was because God could not look on sin. And when Emmett became the personification of race hatred, which is a sinful thing, again, it was too horrid to look at. People could not look at it and come away as if nothing had happened. It had to leave an indelible impression upon whoever viewed him. And I just, with that in mind, knowing that race hatred is something we've got to get rid of, we cannot afford to live in a world that is torn with race hatred. And we can even look right now over in Jerusalem and see what is happening.
Okay, let's cut, because we're not going to, we can't, you know, it was... And this is just about it, okay? So, what did your son's death and the whole case, what did it say to black people?
It said to black people that we can no longer go along with...
I want you to do the same thing. Answer that question in the comments. What did the murder of Emmett Till say to you?
Customs as they are, and grin and bear it. We have got to shake these shackles off. We've got to stand up. We've got to be men and women. And when the pressure, when people begin to oppress us, we have to resist. We cannot take this sitting down, lying down, running and crying. It's time to get up and do. And Emmett's death was the opening of the civil rights movement. He became not only the impetus for the civil rights movement, but he was the sacrificial lamb of the movement. And when people saw what had happened to my son, men stood up who had never stood up before. People became vocal who had never vocalized before. And people decided that they were going to shake the shackles of intimidation. They weren't going to live this way any longer. And there was even a group that was forming to go to Mississippi and fight for a life, for a normal lifestyle. I understand that they were discouraged somewhat. I don't know whether they sent out troops or what, but they were blocked. They never made it to Mississippi. But it was with this in mind that I was able to do some of the things I did, because I knew that if they killed me, the men in Chicago, Illinois, if nowhere else, would rise up to fight for me. And this gave me the courage to go ahead and do some of the things that I did.
Mm-hmm. Let's cut.
Okay.
I want to go back to the trial, and this doesn't have to be a long answer, but you know, I think we might be able to use it. I think it's important. You didn't stay in Sumner. You didn't stay in Greenwood. You stayed in Mount Bayou. Can you tell me what Mount Bayou was and why you stayed there?
I stayed in Mount Bayou because it was an all-black town. And there was a doctor there by the name of T.R.M. Howard. He was revered in that particular part of the country. And no white people would come into Mount Bayou because they were afraid of the black people there. Dr. Howard was, he had a clinic and a hospital in Mount Bayou. And he was really looked up to. He was appreciated. He was revered. And his house was something that you would think about in one of the women's magazines. It was a beautiful place. It was very spacious. And he had one armed guard that I saw. I don't know how many more. But this was an elderly man who carried a shotgun, And ever so often he would make an appearance around that house. And but it was our impression that there were many more people surrounding the house to make sure that no one attempted to do us bodily harm while we were there. And every morning when time came for us to go to court, Dr. Howard would furnish us 2 automobiles, a limo and a convertible Oldsmobile with air conditioning. I'd never seen a convertible with air. And I begged to ride in that car one day, and I got the thrill of going to Sumner in that car. But that night they put me back in the limo that had the dark glasses. You could not see inside. And every day Dr. Howard was going among the people trying to drum up witnesses, people who would testify. And he didn't find many. I don't know if he found any, but he did learn a lot of things. He, Medgar Evers, and Ruby Hurley, who was I don't know what Ruby was, but she was an officer for the NAACP. I think Medgar was a field representative. I don't know exactly what the title was.
So I'm sorry. Let me just follow up real quick.
Okay.
Real close.
Those 3 people were instrumental in trying to find witnesses, getting Moses right in and out of Sumner. And I understand that one time they shipped him out in a casket.
So you felt safe.
I felt safe in Mount Bio, yes.
Let me ask you again, because I was still talking over. Our voices kind of merged. So you felt safe in Mount Bayou?
Yes, I did. I knew that with the armed guards and with the people looking out for Dr. Howard and for his guest, I felt that I would be safe.
Okay, cut. Okay. Again, Ms. Mobley, we're going to start way back, and I've got a lot of questions, and we'll take some breaks. So, why did your parents leave Mississippi and move to Chicago?
My father was looking for better living conditions, and we had relatives in the city, and they were constantly writing about the opportunities, and sometime in late 23, my father left Mississippi and came to Chicago. He was employed by the Corn Products Refining Company in Argo, Illinois.
So when he left, he was part of a lot of people, what they call the Great Migration. He was part of a lot of people who were leaving Mississippi in the South, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. My family was kind of late leaving, but on my mother's side, my aunt had come to Chicago, my Aunt Mamie, the oldest sister, and some other relatives. And they were the ones that were urging my mother and dad to leave the South and come to Illinois, come to Chicago.
Why? What did they hope to find in Chicago? What did they leave and in Mississippi? And what did they hope to find in Chicago? All these people who were leaving.
Well, they were looking almost as the Jews were looking for the promised land. Chicago was a land of promise, and they thought that milk and honey was everywhere, and so it was a lot of excitement leaving the South, leaving the cotton fields, leaving the place where you had to get off the sidewalk as you approached a white woman particularly, and holding your head down. You could hold your head up in Chicago. So this was very, very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Great. You talk about your life in Chicago. As a very young adult. I mean, you were working for the government. I believe. I mean, you had a middle class life, did you not?
I suppose you would say that. In fact, I have learned in these latter years that my son was thought of as the rich kid. And, well, I thought we lived a very ordinary life. I was the second black person in Argo, Illinois, to get off my knees and start working for the federal government. I had worked with the Coffee School of Aeronautics for about 2 years, and that's where a lot of the Tuskegee Airmen first became pilots, and during the war they became known as the Tuskegee whatever, I can't remember their exact title. But I worked with those fellows out at 87th and Harlem before there was even transportation there. There were no roads leading to 87th and Harlem. And I remember they would pick me up every morning at 87th Street, and we would bump, bump, bump until we got to the airport. They would pick me up at 63rd and Harlem. And we just picked our way out to 87th and Harlem. That gave me, that I was looked upon with a lot of respect, because I was no longer cleaning houses and babysitting and washing and ironing. And believe me, my wages were about $7 a week, but I earned every cent of it. I had the big house to clean up. I had the children to babysit and to feed and to bathe and to play with. I had the washing to do, the ironing to do. The responsibility of the entire family was mine. And I must say that I did a remarkable job. I was a very thorough little housekeeper.
So your move to government work was a real step up.
My move to government work was very historic, because none of the black people were able to take the civil service exam. It wasn't even open to us. But my best girlfriend, Ollie Williams, I had gotten her a job with the Coffee School of Aeronautics, and we would ride together every morning. In fact, she would have breakfast in my house in Argo, and then we would, my mother would take us to 63rd in Harlem, and the bus would pick us to go to 87th in Harlem. And 2 mornings she didn't show, and I couldn't understand what had happened to Ollie. I called her, and somebody told me that Ollie was at work. I said, no, she didn't come to work yesterday or today. And they told me, oh, she has a civil service job. Who? Okay, so when I got a chance to speak with Ollie, I wanted to know what is going on and why didn't you tell me? And I don't know, she really never gave me a satisfactory explanation. But I told her, so will you tell me where you take that exam? And she was a little hedgy about telling me, but I got it out of her. And I told my mother where I wanted to go. I went back to my job, and I told the owners, there was Cornelius Coffee was the head of everything, and his wife, Willa Brown Coffee, who was an aviatrix, she really ran the show. She ran him and everything else. And I asked for a raise. And she told me, she said, well, I have to tell you, wages are frozen. And when she told me that, it kind of galvanized something within me. And I asked for a day off. And I told him I wouldn't be in tomorrow, whatever day that was. And so the next morning, I told my mother, we're going and take the civil service exam. And Mom would usually try to grant my wishes, and we went. I have no idea where it was. But we went in, and I took that exam. I went through the written and the oral with flying colors. But I had to pass the typing test. And by accident, I had gotten into the shorthand typing aspect of high school life. And I knew how to type. I knew the keyboard, but I guess I was as nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof. And I didn't pass the test. I didn't get the 45 words a minute. But the young lady in charge, who was also black, and that was a shock to me, Thelma Frazier was her name. She told me, she said, you go home and see a movie tonight and come back in the morning and pass this test. You can type. I can tell that. Oh my God. She said, go to the movie. She didn't know what a key, something she had touched, because going to the movies was something that I was not allowed to do. Even though I was grown, I had been married. My son was almost 2 years old. This was in 43. Lewis had gone into service. That was my husband. We had come to a parting of the ways, and he had been given a choice to go to jail or go to the Army, and he decided to go to the Army. And but I still couldn't go to the show because Mama was still the boss. Now, I was 21 years old, I guess. But anyway, I told Mama that I had to go to the show tonight. I said, the lady in charge told me to go to the show and to relax and come back and pass the test. And I was so excited about going to the show. And Mama gave in. She told me, okay, you can go to the show. And I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. I can't remember what it was, but that was the best show I've ever seen in my life, because I was watching it without fear of being discovered and given a licking when I got home. Because Mama would apply the strap or switch or whatever she found handy. And I went in the next morning and I zoomed through that test. I mean, it was really a matter of post-hypnotic suggestion, I would say, because I went through that test with flying colors and I was hired. And the funny thing about it was, I got a bigger salary than my friend got. She started working at $1,220 a year, and I got hired at $1,440. So that made me, oh my goodness, I was on the real high step.
Mm-hmm. So,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Do you need some water? Want some water?
Maybe I should.
Should we cut?
Yeah, let's cut for 1 second.
Hey.
So at that point, you and your son, you kind of have this had a very middle class life, a TV and those kind of things. Where now you.
No, we didn't have a TV, but I'll tell you what we did have. We had a telephone, and that was that put us in a class all by ourselves. There were about 2 or 3 families on our block with telephones, and we were the first ones. The next thing, we had a brand new Ford automobile. Now, it wasn't brand new then. We bought that Ford in 1933. It was a 1933 Ford Deluxe sedan with 4 doors, but it had no heater and no air conditioner. It was just a stripped-down Ford. And but when my mother bought that car, she had the lights turned off, she had the gas turned off, and she disconnected the telephone. We had to put everything we had into paying the $33 a month car note. And it was predicted that Alma was going to lose that car and lose that home she's living in. And instead of losing it, my mother paid the last 3 months ahead of time. She took the man $99 before she could drive back to the house, which was less than 3 blocks. The news was on my street that Alma had paid for that automobile. Everything you did was news, particularly with some families. And the Mallory family, which was Earlene's, where her roots, and the Gaines family, that was my mother. And there was one more, Ruby Johnson. Those 3 women, what they did was the pattern for everyone else to follow. But nobody ever bought that brand new automobile. My mother was the only one. And she was the only driver. My stepfather did not drive. But being church people, usually they were dealing with church work or school work. My mother was quite a community person, because as long as I was in school, she was in school. And so was Ruby Johnson, and Rosie Mallory couldn't be there because she worked. But my mom would report back to her. So they had their little network going.
Let me ask you another question, because I want to. Well, you'll be tired out by the time we get finished with this. Probably we're getting her glasses all the time.
Okay, Stanley, if you look at the...
And I have speed.
Okay. Ms. Mobley, talk to me a little bit about the joy at the birth of your son.
Oh my goodness, we were all excited because I was the oldest grandchild, and I was getting ready to bring a son into the world, and I was everything kind of centered around Mamie. I was the focal point in the family because I was a smart little kid, and my mother had raised me real good in the church, and I was excelling in school. And when time came for me to bring forth the child, everybody was focused in on Mamie and this baby. Well, I went to the hospital, and on a Wednesday morning, but my son wasn't born until sometime Friday. And I was having difficulty with the birth. He was a breech baby. And they put me in this room, and they kind of forgot about me, and the water broke, and when the water broke, I began to get okay. I was no longer struggling. And when one nurse passed by my room, and I was up helping the other lady in the bed that was in the room, and she was very vocal about her birth. She was cursing her husband, and she was everything, and screaming, and I was trying to calm her down. And that's when they grabbed me and took me into delivery. And all the time that I'd been begging them to come and see about me, they'd just been passing by. But this time I was whisked into the room, and I thought the baby was coming, but it didn't feel like the baby. It felt like something else, and I called for a bedpan, and the doctor told me the baby is going to come out the same way he went in. And I blushed. I mean, I could feel myself turning red. I don't know how. I thought the doctor thought the baby got where he was, but the idea of him saying that, that just kind of got under my skin. And then the next thing I knew, they were shooting me with a needle. They gave me, what did they give me? Ether. They shot me with a needle, then they put a cone over my mouth. And I didn't want that thing over my face. And Well, the next thing I knew, I was waking up. The baby had been delivered, but it was a forceps delivery. And when they brought the baby to me, I saw scars here, scars on his nose. He was kind of scarred up a bit. And I said, "Oh, what an ugly baby." And Emmett jerked his head. I mean, a wee baby, just hours old. But it looks like that he looked up at me and he began to cry. And oh my God, I said, "Oh," I pulled him to me. I said, "Honey, Mother loves you." I was trying to make up for what I had said because it seemed that he had reacted to what I said. And I didn't see him anymore. I don't know whether he might have been 2 weeks old. He might have been a month old. But I became, I had an infection following the birth. And so they had to keep us, we were isolated from one another. They kept him in the hospital for 2 weeks because the umbilical cord had wrapped around his left hand and his right knee, and that's why he was coming breech. Well, they got that straightened out. His knee was swollen, his arm was swollen, and when they got him passable, is what I used to call it, they sent him home, but they kept me. Then they brought him back to the hospital and sent me home. So we missed one another again. He was a month old before I really got a chance to have him as my own. And I was so disappointed because my little baby had turned from a little white baby with blue eyes and blonde hair to a little brown baby. He wasn't really brown, but he was so much darker. And I wondered, was that my baby? And Mama said, "Oh, yes, this is your baby." Because the comment had been made at his birth that give him 30 days and he'll look the way he's supposed to look. And certainly enough, in 30 days, he was Emmett Till. Well, we got along wonderfully together, except that I did have to put him on a formula. I wasn't able to breastfeed him. My milk was either it wasn't enough. It was something wrong.
Let me interrupt you because I think that you're gonna tire out by the time we get through.
Okay, interrupt when you want to.
We got so much detail. If that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Because I want to jump ahead and where I guess the next thing would be Emmett's father's death, and I want to keep this in the time period.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But so, are we rolling?
Yes.
So, tell me, how you heard it and when did you hear about how you heard about Emmett's father's death?
I received a telegram from the U.S. Department of the Army, I guess, and they told me that your husband, Louis Till, died May and the date. And I just looked at that a couple of days ago. But, and they said the cause of death, willful misconduct. And that was all they told me. Finally, they
Be honest with me in the comments. What do you think willful misconduct meant back then?
sent me his what few possessions he had, which consisted mainly of a ring. I can't remember anything else that they sent me, but they sent something. And I put the ring away because I had no use for the ring, and I wasn't ready to give it to, Emmett couldn't use it. He was too tiny. And he was only about 3 or 4 or 5 years old at the most. So the ring was put away for another day. And I began to ask the Army what happened. And they never would respond to me. They would not give me. They told me that they had told me all that they were permitted to tell me in the telegram. And that's all I ever heard until Senator Eastland got the information that I had been trying to get. But I was also reading an article where his buddies, some of his Army buddies, said that Lewis Till was railroaded.
Okay, we'll talk about that
Yes.
later, because I want to
Okay.
stay. Yeah. So, tell me how. So, you found out your husband had passed, and you put the ring away. How did Emmett get the ring?
The day Emmett left for Mississippi, the day before he left for Mississippi, I brought the ring out and told him the story behind the ring. I told him it was his father's ring. I didn't go into any details. He knew that his dad was dead, but I never tried to tell him anything about his father's death because I didn't know anything. And I hadn't even told him that his dad and I were separated. So Emmett just knew that he had a father in the Army, and this was his ring, and he died while he was in the service. And as Emmett was, well, I guess you just want me to talk about the ring.
Okay. Yeah. Let me start the story over, if you can. And
Should I go
just,
water again?
No, this is fine.
Stay there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just tell me the story and kind of give me the short version, because you were kind of going off on probably something that's too much, but it's a great story. The day before Emmett was going to Mississippi, I gave him the ring. If you can tell me, that would be great. So I'll ask you again. How did Emmett get the ring?
I gave him the ring one day before he left going to Mississippi. And he was very excited about the ring. I mean, he really appreciated that ring. And before he left, he started running up the steps to board the train because we could hear the whistle blowing. And he was going to join Papa Mose and Wheeler Parker on the train. And we were at 63rd Street. The train originated at 12th Street. And he was running up the steps to try to make it to the train. And I said, Emmett, Bo, I called him Bo. I said, where are you going? You haven't kissed me goodbye. And how do I know I'll ever see you again? And he looked at me and he said, oh, Mama. He kind of scolded me for saying something like that. But he turned around, he came back, and he kissed me goodbye. And he said, here, take this. He pulled his watch off and gave it to me. He said, I won't need this where I'm going. I said, what about your ring? He said, oh.
Different type of goodbye. Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments.
I'm going to show it off to the fellows. And with that, he was up the steps and on his way to get on the train.
Great. Thank you. What kind of boy was Emmett? What was he like?
Well, to me, he was perfection. We mothers don't see much wrong with our sons. And I only saw Emmett in the evening. I was at work during the daylight hours when he was up playing and doing other things that little boys do. But my mother never had any complaints about Emmett. She never told me that she spanked him. I mean, it seemed that he was just a kid that did what he was supposed to do. And she took him to church with her, so he was brought up in a church environment. My stepfather thought he was perfection. Mr. Gaines, he was the most wonderful stepfather in the world. But one day we came home from church, Mother and I, and Bo was straddled Papa Tom, and he was taking his finger, putting them in his nose, and Papa Tom tears were coming out of his eyes. And when I saw what Bo was doing, and Papa was letting him do it, I grabbed him and I whacked him on his rear end. I said, "You don't do that to Papa Tom." And Papa Tom raised up and he cursed me for everything he could think of, because I had hit that baby. The one and only time that he ever showed any ill will towards me, but he told me to keep my hands off of that boy. So, and the kid had him crying. He knew better. But he didn't do that anymore, incidentally.
You should zoom in a little bit.
Sure.
What kind of I know a lot of times, single mothers and young, and you're also a young mother, and their kids are very close. Was Emmett helpful around the house? Were you guys close?
Well, at age 10, we had moved to Chicago. We had gone to Detroit, and I had left Detroit and returned to Chicago for the first time. I'd lived in Argo all my life. And there were just the two of us at 64th and St. Lawrence. But I had moved my uncle, my father's oldest brother, and his wife in on the first floor, so that Emmett would never come home to an empty house. There was always somebody there to receive him and that he had to account to. And at age 10, we were 10 when we moved from Detroit back to Chicago. And we moved in about November. And later on the following year, Emmett told me, he said, "If you can go out and make the money, I can take care of the house." And I dumped the house on him. I mean, it was just like I was carrying a load, and I laid it down. And that kid really took care of my house. He swept, he mopped, he helped me to lay rugs, he helped me to lay tile. I mean, he was an able-bodied help around the house. Later he told me, he said, "Now, Mama, I could do the laundry too." And I went down and made sure that he knew how to operate the wringer machine, and then I forgot the laundry. He did the laundry. Then he decided that he could pay the bills and shop the groceries. And I remember the first time I gave him $100 to go and pay bills, and I was shaking like a leaf on a tree, because $100 was a lot of money. And we didn't have checkbooks at that time. Didn't even know the use of a checkbook. But Emmett went down to State and Madison. He paid a bill that I had at one of the leading stores there, and then coming back south, he stopped at Sears and the Fair store and paid the bills there. He came all the way back to 63rd between Cottage Grove and Stony Island, and he paid my telephone bill, my light bill, my gas bill, and he had about 17 cents left. And he put all the paid bills on the dresser along with the change. And he let me know that he knew that was his, but he would wait for me to give it to him. He wouldn't just take it. And my aunt had given him permission to be out a couple doors away, and that's where he was. And when he thought I was home, he came home. And I complimented him on what a beautiful job he had done, and even brought me the change. He said, "Well, I left it there." He said, "But I earned that." I said, "You certainly did." And I gave him that and an extra $1. And that just thrilled him all the way down to his toes. He was very grateful. And then his cooking. He had two things that he liked: fried corn and pork chops. And when he would shop, he would buy 2 packages of pork chops. And one was for me, one was for him. And he would cook these pork chops in separate skillets because he wanted to make sure that he got his 3 or 4 or however many, and that I didn't get one of his by mistake. I mean, he really divided those chops up. Then he would open 2 cans of cream-style corn. And then he would come with the pepper shaker. And you have never eaten black corn in your life. That corn would be black with pepper. And I would be eating and drinking because my mouth was on fire, and I tried to discourage the use of so much pepper. I don't know if I ever succeeded or not. But to this day, I am very, very careful with the way I use black pepper.
Okay, let's cut for a minute.
Sure.
Everybody's cell phones are off, right?
Yes, sir.
Let me see.
Haven't heard one.
We don't want to hear one.
Mine is
Okay, ready? Whoops.
Whoops.
I turned mine off. It was on. Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Tell me when.
I'm ready. Roll.
Okay, rolling.
Okay.
And Mike's in, so speed.
Just go.
Ms. Mobley, tell me the story of how Emmett happened to go south.
Papa Mose was in town. He had come into Chicago to bury a friend of his. And while he was here, it was decided that 2 of his grandsons would return home with him for the summer. Well, Emmett was very close to the grandson that lived in Argo, Illinois, because we lived next door to one another. And Emmett, even though Wheeler was 2 years older, he and Wheeler were just, they were almost soulmates. And when Emmett found out that Wheeler was going, he turned the heat on me to let him go. We had already planned our vacation, and we were supposed to be leaving for Detroit, Michigan to pick up a cousin, and then we were going to drive to Omaha, Nebraska and visit with her relatives there. And Emmett had been promised that he could even drive on the highway. We were going to let him try his driving skills on the highway, and which I did not agree to, but that's what Jean had told him, and I wouldn't go against Jean. And while we were almost in the midst of getting ready, when Emmett left going to Mississippi, something happened to me and I became immobilized. I couldn't walk. I was feeling fine, but my legs just wouldn't support my body. And by the time I got back home from the train station, I was forced to crawl up the steps. And so that persisted for a week. But in order for Emmett to go to Mississippi, my mother and I felt it would be necessary to speak to Papa Mose and give him some words of caution for the boys. 3 Chicago boys going to Mississippi, and they're going to be with at least 3 or 4 of Papa Mose's boys, and it was time to really zero in and help these Chicago boys survive the summer. And they laughed at us. They thought we were so silly, Mama and me, for us to be coming over about this one little chick. Well, that's all we had. We had one little chick. The rest of them had many sons, many daughters. They were loaded with relatives, nieces, nephews, etc. But we just had the one. And the argument that Emmett used to get me, that made me cave in, he said, well, Mama, how is it that you and Mamu could take 2 of Uncle Mose's daughters and raise them, And we had taken Thelma when she was in 3rd grade, and she was in 2nd year teachers college then. Laretha, we took her in 7th grade, and she had finished high school and had gone to work to help Thelma make it through Chicago Teachers College. And Emmett couldn't understand how I could take them, and they hadn't even been back to the South to see their parents. And yet you won't let me go for a week. And that really got to my mother, and it got to me. So we were both coming over to the daughter's house, to Moses Wright's daughter's house, who was the mother of Curtis Jones. And we were going to meet up over there. I didn't know she was coming. She didn't know I was coming. But I was parking on the east side of the street, and she was parking on the west side of the street in front of their house. And that's when they laughed. Oh, they thought that was the most ridiculous thing, how concerned we were about this one little kid. And we laughed at one another. I didn't know you were coming. Well, I certainly didn't know you were coming, but we arrived at the same hour. And we went in and we cautioned Papa Mose and we talked to the boys. And I said, well, we need to pray about this. And Mama said, well, I've already prayed. And we finally gave our consent. And then we had to stop. We had to unpack and repack Emmett because I had his things. They were kind of interpacked. And when we got all through, we were supposed to meet Papa Mose down at the 12th Street station, but we just couldn't make it. So we went to the 63rd Street station, and that's where Emmett and I parted. And that's when my legs gave out. Nothing wrong with my knees, ankles, anything. But the strength went out of my legs, and they would not function. I don't even know how I got back to my car, but I did. But by the time I got home, I was reduced to crawling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can we get tighter?
Get tighter, sure.
Do you need some water?
I don't know.
Okay. What was it that you told Emmett and the boys about Mississippi?
I let them know that Mississippi was not Chicago. And when you go to Mississippi, you're living by an entirely different set of rules. It is yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, yes, sir, and no, sir. And, Bo, if you see a white woman coming down the street, you get off the sidewalk and drop your head. Don't even look at her as she passes by. Now, I was really going to extremes. I didn't know that was really the custom down there. But I have read since then that was the custom. You get off the sidewalk and you lower your head. You don't look a white person in the eye. And I guess I made things as scary as I could possibly make them. And I just had to instill it in him, what to do and what not to do.
Great. Now, the story about Emmett and having a wallet. Did you buy the wallet for him? Where did he get this wallet?
Yes, I bought that wallet at. It was a store that had been. It was a theater that had been converted into a store. It was formerly the Southtown Theater, which was a beautiful place. I mean, it was so magnificent. And it was near 63rd and Halstead. It was on 63rd Street, about a block east of Halstead. And it had become almost a junk store. I mean, it almost looked like Jewtown. We have a section in Chicago that we used to call Jewtown, and that's where all the stuff was out and picked over and rummaged through and whatnot. But we had to get that wallet. We had to get several other things that he needed. And we had quite a problem selecting a wallet. At that time, there were pictures of movie stars in the wallets and a little biographical sketch of them. And Emmett had Hedy Lamarr in one hand and Dorothy Lamour in the other hand, and he couldn't decide which one he wanted. But if I remember correctly, I think he chose Hedy Lamarr. I don't really know. But anyway, whichever one, that was the picture that was in the wallet. And that was the picture.
Be honest in the comments. Which one do you think you would have chosen?
That Milam and Bryant claimed Emmett said was his girlfriend. But that was a movie star.
Okay, let's cut. You gotta be quiet to change. Okay, so talk to me about
Speed.
you and Emmett went shopping for the trip.
Yes, in order for Emmett to take this trip, we had to pick up a few items in order for him to go. And one of these was a wallet. And we had gone to this store, and we were searching through the wallets, and he selected two. One had a picture of Hedy Lamarr, one had Dorothy Lamour. And both of these were sort of his favorites. And he was having a lot of difficulty deciding which one to take. But if I remember correctly, he took the one with Hedy Lamarr's picture in it. And that's a picture that he had in his wallet that Milam and Bryant said he said was his girlfriend.
Okay, great.
Keep rolling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now he was going to visit Mose Wright, right? That's who he's going to stay with. If you can give me, it doesn't have to be long, but a quick sketch of, what was Mose Wright like? What kind of man was he?
Moses Wright was a preacher, and he was a sanctified preacher, and he pastored a couple of churches because they didn't have enough preachers to go around, so quite often one minister would take over 2 or 3 churches. And he had the one there at Money, and I don't know where the other one was. But he was a hard-working man. He was small and wiry, but could that old man work? And he knew how to work his crew. His children, his grandchildren, or whoever was around, they all went to the field. So his boys were accustomed to field work. Emmett wasn't, but Emmett would help Aunt Elizabeth at the house. When she would get up and fix breakfast, he would stay until the breakfast dishes were done.
Much of these different Emmett Till stories. Let me know in the comments, what kind of person do you think Emmett Till was?
And they would go to the garden and select what they were going to have for dinner. And when all of those pots were on, then Emmett would go to the field. He would usually go after the boys and Papa Mose came in for their lunch. Then he would go back with them then. And another thing that really excited her, Emmett could handle the washing machine, and he would wash every day. She had a lot of people to wash for. In addition to her own family, which was about 7 or 8 people, then she had 2 or 3 babies she was taking care of, babysitting, and then her stepdaughters would bring their laundry over and she would wash for them. I mean, it was an ongoing wash cycle. And by Emmett being accustomed to using a washing machine, he could do a lot of that work for her. And that just thrilled her to death, as you will see in the letters that she wrote.
Let me ask you a question about the letters, too. Can we come one second?
Mike send Speed.
You talked about that you talked to Emmett and the boys before they went south, and and told you told Emmett to put his head down and not to look people in the eye. What did Emmett think of all this? Did he take this seriously?
Now I wonder if he did. He seemed to be taking it all in what I was telling him, but there was something about him that made me think he thought I was exaggerating, which I was. I was trying to exaggerate. If I could go high enough, things could soak into his head that you have to be very careful. And now he told me that he understood, and that's all I could go by. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now the other boys were accustomed to going to Mississippi, not Wheeler, but the other boy, Curtis. And oddly enough, Willie Mae, his mother, would not let him go when Papa Mose, Bo, and Wheeler went. He didn't go until the following Saturday. Maybe he arrived a couple hours before the men forced their way in.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm asking a lot of follow-up questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Emmett was it infant paralysis that he had? And he had a stutter?
He had polio.
Polio.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, Emmett was a kid who loved to play. He was outdoors. And we noticed that every night his temperature would go up. Every day he was as fine as could be. But the minute night came on, that temperature would soar. So I told my mother, I said, Mom, you take him to the doctor and find out what this is all about. And that's when he was diagnosed as having polio. And the polio never stopped him during the day, but it stopped him every night. And when he had recovered from polio, we noticed that his speech was not the way it had been. I don't know what was affected that made him have a stutter, but the speech impediment never lessened. I mean, it just went on and on. And we began to take him to doctors and clinics and what have you. And after over a year of this, we were told at one of Chicago's finest clinics, which was Illinois Search and Research, they called it. And the doctor there told me he would probably outgrow it. And that was the last. He was having speech therapy in school and what have you. But I noticed that anything he memorized, he could give that back to you perfectly. And that's when I started having him memorize this, that, and the other.
Okay, why don't you hit a clip?
Now let's be honest, we can never truly understand the mindset of Mamie Till, the things that she went through, the events or whatnot. So I want you to put yourself in her place. What special message would you give the monsters that took her child from her?